Welcome to our latest LinkedIn Live at Required, and not one, not two, but three guests today. And the reason for that is we've got actually a really important topic to talk about. So I think it's quite a technical thing, but I've asked the guys to be really gentle with us on the call or the show today to make sure that we're going to talk about it in a way that I think people very new to the subject can understand, with the takeaways of what you should really be thinking about now. So just quick intros, everyone. We'll go on my right to left. James.
Hi, everyone. James Harris, Compliance Director at Workwell Solutions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Walsh. I'm Enterprise BDM over at Sonovate.
And Alex Jackson, BDM at Kingsbridge Contractor Insurance.
Good to meet you all, guys, on this call, and vetted partners have required. So, rather than me try and nudge my way through it, James, probably if you would sort of say about what you guys see the changes as happening in April, and in layman's terms for founders and recruitment leaders, how would you explain what's going to happen in April 2026?
Thanks, Andy, and thanks everyone for taking the time today. So to summarize very briefly, April next year introduces the concept of joint and several liability when umbrella companies are engaged. And this will make the agency or the end hirer, if there is no agency, jointly and severally liable together with the umbrella company in the event there are unpaid taxes for whatever reason. And this will be a strict liability with no statutory excuse. Now, the aim of this is to drive out the bad operators in our sector, the non-compliant minority who exploit the rules and pay workers using a variety of schemes designed to avoid, or in some cases evade, UK taxes. And I'm sure you've seen many umbrella companies have been publicised quite widely recently. That's just one example of that type of scheme. And so the view of government is that if they can make the agency or the end hirer, as the case may be, equally liable for the bad practices of the companies they engage to employ and to pay the workers that they supply to their clients, well, then that, they hope, should drive out that non-compliance from the industry. The good news is that if you're undertaking good due diligence today, if you're working with robust, reputable, compliant suppliers, then day-to-day nothing should need to change. Although we would expect to see more operational transparency, more robust due diligence, and more regular auditing, for example. And the key, I think, moving forward will be really to get under the bonnet of your supply chains, truly understand companies that you're working with, and to partner more closely with them. And I will say this is just one step in the roadmap. This isn't umbrella regulation as such that we're speaking about here. That's to come with the introduction of the Employment Rights Bill and the Fair Work Agency next year and then the year after.
Always change.
Well, yeah. They like to keep us busy, Andy. But what we're speaking about here is umbrella tax reform, effectively. So where an umbrella is involved, tax reform to make the entire chain accountable.
So in real layman's terms, as an agency owner next year, if my umbrella doesn't do what they should do, then I have a potential liability. Correct. And I'm responsible. If they don't pay the tax, I'm responsible for paying the tax. Correct.
It's a this isn't debt transfer. The authorities don't need to exhaust all attempts of obtaining the money from the umbrella first before they approach the agency. It's a joint and several liability, so it's jointly held by both the umbrella and the agency. So yes, yeah, exactly right.
AJ, Alexander Jackson from Kingsbridge. So Kingsbridge don't do umbrellas, but you do IR35 and IR35 insurance. So is this are we going back in time now? Do we think people will start looking at how they can go about using limited company contractors who they've, steered away from a little bit?
It's hard to say, but I'm, quietly optimistic, ever the optimist. But as sort of James talks about around an opportunity to engage with your supply chain again, build further trust around being a compliant driven business, it does open that conversation again that agencies might not have had for 4 years, since 2021 or 2017 with the public sector, to actually have a conversation with clients around status and maybe how they could engage with PSEs. With that obviously comes some challenges. You have to have processes in place, education, and that's where Kingsbridge can support agencies. So if you are speaking with clients, having this conversation, just link us in, and we can certainly assist with those conversations around how to engage with PSEs compliantly. And if the supply chain about the tax liability, as it's an opinion status, there is an insurable risk there, and that's exactly what we provide.
Fantastic. And Chris, with the best background I've seen certainly today, I guess you guys at Sonovate, you fund agencies, you fund contractor payrolls. What are you seeing in the market? What are your agencies telling you right now?
So I mean, for us, it's kind of twofold. So looking at the agency piece, I think over the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen a real sort of will to engage from agencies that haven't had their own PAYE function previously, for a variety of different reasons. But ultimately, parties are now looking at this, and despite, having worked myself across several of the larger umbrella companies over the past 10 years, that there is absolutely a need for those businesses in this economy. However, some agency owners won't be able to sleep at night, being transparent, in their words, not mine, with having that sort of risk now being outsourced to somebody else, with them being joint and severally liable. So we're seeing agencies that haven't had a PAYE function in-house before come to us to ultimately look to bring that into their business, where we can absolutely support them. Another avenue that really we're seeing, because we kind of sit right across those new startup entities right through to the enterprise multinational businesses, is they're starting to ultimately concentrate their supplier list. We've been seeing that for probably the last 6 months now, and I think something that we haven't touched upon is the increased risk for the neutral vendors, or MSPs, with the current legislation, how it's being penned out, in that they are the party that will be contracting with the end hirer, so they are the party that will be liable. And what we've started to see is a number of those larger MSPs with big chains of tier 2 agencies start to reach out to them and ultimately say, who are in your onward supply chain, which umbrellas are you using, and let us go through the vetting process of those umbrellas, because ultimately we will sit with the liability moving forward. So we're really seeing a concentration ultimately in the market for the umbrella side, which is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on where you sit. But I think you can see with, James touched upon it as well, a number of entities ultimately who have got the right accreditations, sadly going out of business in the first part of this year. So they're kind of the two trends that we're observing at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, very much umbrella companies, I think you've said it, perform a really useful, decent service. It's not just the PAYE, the payroll. It very much is as well handling the onboarding, the offboarding, the disputes when they come up, handling those tribunal cases, and actually in a relatively a very commoditized market. So I think, had it just have been this, we might have seen something different. But James, you touched on the Employment Rights Bill coming forward as well, and it was never about. I think sort of one of the things, when I was at S3, we didn't run the UK payroll in house, even though they had circa 3,000 workers, just because we were quite good at recruiting. We didn't want to get quite good at payroll, but also as well we also didn't want to have to onboard, offboard, deal with all that, and the umbrellas were a competitive price point that it wasn't a problem. So I guess you've got that sort of dual thing of, well, maybe we could take the liability, we don't want to take, but also as well, do we want to then take, then the employment liability? So comes in as well. So it must be a very difficult one to navigate at the moment for founders and leaders.
Yeah, for sure. I'd imagine it is. I mean, and you mentioned it, Andy. That's the point. Umbrellas are typically in the business of employment, offering the best opportunities for employment and employee benefits and everything that goes along with that. Leaving recruitment firms to concentrate on what they do best. The absence of an umbrella, and I recognise there will be businesses that will consider taking things in-house. Very likely that's a consideration. There are risks with that, though, that should be considered before those steps are taken. For example, the way that this legislation is drafted is so wide that taking it in-house doesn't necessarily mean that these rules won't apply. So if you've got an operation that is managed by the agency, no umbrella in the chain, but what they do still looks and smells like an umbrella company operation, then the rules may still apply. There's the concept of a purported umbrella company in these rules, which potentially would mean that if the agency is operating like an umbrella does, in the sense that it's now employing workers directly, then it may become the purported umbrella for the purposes of these new rules. And in that case, in the absence of an umbrella in the chain, joints and several liability would then sit between the agency and the end hirer, bringing the end hirer into scope of a potential risk that they didn't otherwise have previously. So the drafting is very wide, so lots to consider before decisions are taken on that, I suspect.
And we talked about auditing your supply chains. What are the things that people should be looking for when they're auditing their supply chains? So if I'm sat there and I'm working with 10, 20 different umbrella companies, where do I start?
Well, the good thing is most firms do have a regime for auditing and undertaking due diligence on umbrella companies. We've seen it for years already. Look for accreditations. FCSA is a prime example. There are platforms out there now which facilitate the transparency I mentioned earlier. So platforms like SafeRec and Veripay will give a live analysis of the payroll being run by the umbrella company. So platforms like that will become widespread. They are already now for the most part. So and look for a willingness to comply. Look for an umbrella company that's happy to be audited, that wants to demonstrate its levels of compliance. It isn't hiding behind just issuing a pay slip and that's all you can get. Running real-time information reports and providing that data to an agency on request, being willing to undertake periodic audits, not just an annual exercise. There's lots, obviously, over and above the obvious things like a mini umbrella company operation. You also want to look at the financials. So Chris mentioned earlier about risk of umbrellas failing where they have been accredited. It may well be that that's because they've overextended credit, which put them in a difficult position with their debt. So it's not just about the obvious things to look for, but the less obvious as well, unfortunately. But a far more robust deep dive into companies will be needed moving forward, I suspect.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, and I think a number of the key points you've touched on there, James. For us and in our view, and from my experience, I think outside of asking for recent RTI filings, you really want to be looking at proof of compliance and liquidity. I think that's key. So finding out, how the umbrella is positioned with regards to ultimately their working capital, their bank statements, the confirmed funding lines, and really vitally evidence of bad debt protection or credit insurance. I think, I've touched on a number of entities when I spoke earlier, but, what's becoming over the last several years since the UK market really started to take a downturn in the contingent space, there's been a rise in really the MSPs initially, but then filtering down again to the tier twos, looking at the umbrella companies that they engage with as free payment vehicles effectively, so free funding facilities. Now, there is and there isn't a place for that. ultimately, at the minute, you want to be asking as a recruitment owner, your umbrella supply chain, if they do extend payment terms to the agencies that they support, number one, how are they doing that? Where are they getting the funds from? And really vitally, are those funds insured? Because if they're extending to one entity, they may be extending to 10, 30, 40, 50, you don't know how many. That's fine. And that is actually vital at the minute for some businesses and keeping them afloat, just being transparent. But you really need to be looking at, if something were to happen, not from yourself as an agency owner, but one of the others they're extending credit to, if something were to happen, i.e. they went insolvent themselves, there was a protracted default position in terms of a disputed invoice or whatever it may be, is that umbrella company robust enough, and does it have the security in order to continue trading and the liquidity, to cover your workers as well? So I think that's really vital. And I think that's something that agency owners, compliance teams really need to be getting under the bonnet with in terms of the onward supply chain.
And I think, that does happen. Umbrellas do the small, certainly some of the smaller and mid-sized ones we've seen. We haven't seen a big failure in a number of years, actually. But I think under the new rules, if HMRC are unable to recover those Crown funds, my understanding is that they can go back and the agency become liable.
Yeah, it's 100% correct. And I feel that is the real vital piece around, asking your suppliers, whatever funds pool they're using, is it insured, and to what level, and what the points of recourse are? So how much is covered, and is there a protracted default clause within there too? Really vital in terms of getting under the bonnet of the financial security of the businesses you're working with.
So for those watching on the LinkedIn Live, if it is, we're live currently on Wednesday the 5th. Do feel free to drop any questions into the comments, and we can take them accordingly. So AJ, are you seeing what are your agencies telling you, and what are they saying about this?
It's a relatively mixed bag, to be honest. And I think the general consensus is for business owners is to sort of identify your own risk appetite and then look at the solutions that are on the market and kind of bring the two together. It's really hard to find that perfect solution. And each one, even if you bring it payroll in-house, comes with its own complexities and costs, with the employment rights bill as well coming in. So, and it's really difficult to provide a solution that fits all. So it is looking at your own risk appetite, your business, going out to your umbrella companies, looking for the ones that are communicating, investing in other products to show transparency. And those ones that are coming back to their agencies the fastest are probably going to be the ones that remain on these reduced PSLs in the future. But yeah, it's an interesting time, but I think with it has come a lot of collaboration across the industry in what is a challenging market. So it's an interesting one because there is a burden now to agencies, but again, there's been increased collaboration, and it's quite positive to see across the market everybody working so hard to ensure compliance.
And ultimately, it will be difficult for agencies. But if we go back to the reason that this legislation's come about is because there are have been rogue operators. And the reason they were able to be rogue operators was because, one, they could actually incentivize agencies to push business their way, and secondly, there was no real downside for an agency to look the other way. Now it squarely is their responsibility. They haven't got that defense. It was previously it was the right thing to do. And now it is it's the imperative thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. There have been measures previously with Criminal Finances Act, for example, where we've seen more responsibility, more onus being placed on other parties in the chain. And this is the natural extension of that, making the whole chain responsible for bad operators, bad practices.
You've actually got a question from Jay Slinger, Chris. How would an agency go about ensuring proper vetting on an umbrella?
I think ultimately it's sitting down and looking at the whites of the eyes of your provider. You know, every umbrella company will be knocking on the door to come and see you, to drop off various goods, to get out and call. But you want to be engaging with the senior people within those umbrella companies. You know, you want to be engaging with their compliance professionals, their FDs, their CFOs. And what ultimately you can always use is Companies House. It's a great tool for you to jump in, have a look at creditors, have a look at debtors, have a look at cash in hand. It will also show you charges on there. So which entities they've got a debenture registered with, whether that's one of the tier ones, a lower term provider, or your major banks out there. It'll give you an indication of the funding lines that they have. You know, ultimately what you want to be looking at as well in terms of a request for information is, as James has alluded to, the real-time information snapshots. You want to be looking at bank statements. It's within your right to request those. Credit insurance, BDP certificate. So you'll always typically go out and do an audit of your suppliers to say, please send us your updated FCSA certificate a week or two before. What you want to be asking for is provide us with your credit insurance policies too, and also funding facility confirmation. They can send you that. Charges are registered for you to see, but you can also ask it of them directly. Now, there are a number of umbrella companies, typically the more historic or longer tenured within the space, that ultimately do have large pools of their own working capital. They may not have a charge registered, but they're really financially secure businesses. They've got other assets. They may have their own property. So asking them the question and demanding that from them is within your right. You are now going to be joint and severally liable for any errors that they commit on your behalf or your contractors or your clients. So asking for a financial snapshot of that business, including those elements again to confirm RTI snapshots, bank statements, credit insurance, bad debt protection policy, and also funding facility confirmation. Those 4 things I'll be asking for from your suppliers today.
So the other thing, I'm working at a recruitment agency. I'm a contract recruiter, or I'm a founder of a business. How do I impress my clients, and how do I get more business out of these changes? Because with change comes opportunity. How do I go and demonstrate my customer needs to work with me because I understand it and I'm on top of this?
I think I'll jump in there. I think evidencing everything Chris has just said, showing your levels of due diligence, showing your taking the time to understand your supply chain and delving under the bonnet of all of your suppliers. It may be that you take steps to reduce your PSL. If you've currently got a PSL or an ASL of 10, 20 companies, that might not be manageable moving forward because there's more onus on you to really get into the detail. So perhaps, that's a reasonable step to take to show that you've understood the risk, you've taken it seriously, and you've taken steps to mitigate that. Just to add to what Chris was saying as well, also think about the less obvious ways that liabilities can arise. So when I say getting into the detail of how your suppliers operate, also try to understand how they do things like process expenses, for example, because moving forward, if there's a liability, if expenses are being funded by an end client through the agency and ultimately onto the umbrella employer for onward payment to that worker, you still need to be comfortable that those expenses could be paid tax-free. If they're paid tax-free in error, there's a potential liability there. Multiply by X number of workers over X number of years, that can become quite chunky. So it's getting into the detail of how your suppliers operate and truly understanding who they are as a business. And as I mentioned earlier, really partner with them. Language needs to be aligned across the chain as well. So the key information document helps with the workers' understanding of rates, for example, but all language really should be aligned across the chain to ensure that the workers truly understand how they're being engaged and what their rates of pay are, how they're calculated. Because again, if that goes awry, potentially then if there's an underpayment to a worker and there's a tax liability multiplied again by X number of workers, then again, that's a joint and several liability. So yeah, it's really getting into the detail of how they operate.
I think it's just a great opportunity to talk to your customers. I mean, they'll be hearing about this, they'll be seeing about it, and both with the employment rights bill as well. I think it's a real opportunity to go and talk and say you should probably take, if you're not sure on someone, take them as a contractor. Let us take the risk, or take the rather than you having to deal with day one rights straight away. We're set up for this. We've got the scale of it. So I think there's that. And the second thing, when the public sector R35 reforms came about, I was running the project at S3, and we got to talk to people we hadn't got to talk to in 5 years. At the top of the organization, people who are actually interested, people who probably had real skin in the game if this went wrong. And we were the subject matter experts on it. And it's a real opportunity for recruiters to actually put the consultant into recruitment consultant as well, by working with their customers and really showing value, showing they understand. This will be one of many things that your clients and customers will be dealing with, whereas you can show real genuine knowledge about it.
Yeah. I think what I'd add to that, Andy, if I were in a consultant's position now, is building on your point, really, doing an exposure mapping exercise with my clients. So where there isn't a main provider or an MSP or neutral vendor in there, or even if there is, doing an exposure mapping exercise to run through with your client where their contingent workers are, through which agencies, do they know which onward umbrella companies are being used, what your agency is doing different down the chain in order to ensure that compliance flows back up, setting a differentiator between what you're doing and your competitors out there to try and secure a tier 1 position, a sole supply agreement, an MSP program if they haven't got one in place, especially for clients where you've got really strong relationships with. This exposure mapping exercise you could really tailor, as long as you know your compliance processes, as we've discussed, of what to do with your onward supply chain, in order you set yourself in good stead over the next 4 or 5 months up until that point, I feel.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, Andy, with a ever-evolving landscape as well. I've done a lot of training sessions on R35 to recruiters that are 0 to 6 months and then 5+ years, and the ones that really take the time to invest in the changes in legislation and use it as an opportunity to have higher-level conversations with their clients are the ones essentially that are going to win the most business. So with change does come an opportunity. Not like it used to be 10 years ago when you place a contractor, but now you have to know around the insurance that they hold. You have to know about R35. You have to know how to run determinations. You have to know about tax. There's so many elements now that so many strings you can add to your bow to differentiate yourself. So yes, it's challenging, but yes, there's opportunity too.
Yeah, I mean, contract consultants should be up in their margins because they're doing much more work. So that's we'll see how that goes down. But it would be good to halt the race to the bottom in terms of margins. Chris Wetherall, as I use Workwell for all of this, who at Workwell will give me all this information? James?
Say that again, sorry, Andy.
Chris Wetherall's said, I use Workwell for all of this. So who at Workwell will give me all this information?
More than welcome to contact me. We have sent a few bits out already. There is still information to be obtained. So with the Employment Rights Bill, for example, although we've got the drafting of some legislation, it's at the moment ping-ponging between House of Lords and House of Commons, and there's so much detail yet to be issued through secondary legislation and still consultations. So it's going to be, unfortunately, probably a bit of a piecemeal exercise with updates and changes as they happen. But yeah, more than welcome to contact me directly after this.
Fantastic. So we've got a budget coming up, and I think, in case anyone didn't know, read a paper or look on LinkedIn. So what are we expecting? Because obviously last year's budget brought us this. So anything on the rumour mill that we might be expecting in this year's budget speech?
I heard one this morning from a really vital source, my own father. He obviously, we didn't get much from Rachel Reeves question and answer yesterday, which seemed to be deflection of question back and nothing until the budget. But he's told me that we're looking at a reduction in employees NI. However, an increase in the basic rate tax of a couple of percent from maybe 20 to 21 or 22%, which for those over retirement age won't sound very good because they don't pay any EEs NIC, which is why he was probably so invested in telling me that. So that's what he'd mooted to me. No idea whether that's true or not.
So that effectively means that anyone that's working pays the same, but anyone that's not working and, you know, relies on passive income or non-work income then moves up.
Exactly.
Interesting. James, any predictions?
Well, I think we can almost guarantee there'll be some increases in tax, whether that's the stealth tax of freezing thresholds or increasing tax rates. I think that roadmap is probably almost certain in some way, shape, or form. But no, nothing over and above that. I think in terms of what we're expecting to see with umbrella tax reform and the employment rights bill, the ERB should gain royal assent by the end of this month, we suspect, and then final legislation released on the umbrella tax reform shortly thereafter in December, probably. But yeah, no, nothing over and above that.
And Alex?
Yeah, same. As much as maybe we'd all like to hear some sort of R35 repeal, not to my knowledge, or I haven't heard anything as of yet. So probably much of the same.
Do we think that there'll be any sort of reverse in the previous budgets, though? I mean, generally we're all talking about the self-employed, the professional services, and it seems that what was once, you know, very lucrative hasn't been in recent years. Do we think that direction of travel will continue, or I think, you know, do we think that the government will, you know, at any stage realise just how important these people are to our economy?
You'd like to hope so. You know, the contingent workforce is a huge part of the economy, and unfortunately, they are getting squeezed more and more each year. You know, it will be hugely welcomed, I imagine, but I haven't heard too much, unless for James.
No one's excited for the budget, so Kel not really surprised that no one's excited for the budget. I think in terms of, we talked about the Employment Right Bill, and I think let's use this to sort of close off and really look, because this is a big change as well. So not just when you're hiring workers, though, but when agencies are employing their own staff and people. And I guess you guys probably work for large organizations. You're probably seeing that, and you're probably making steps and changes yourself. So what are the things, if I'm an employer, I should be looking at come April?
There are things that you can probably start to look at now, or at least start to budget for. So, for example, with the ERB I mentioned earlier, the detail, a lot of the detail is yet to come in secondary legislation, but it's unlikely that the landscape will change massively. And we know the direction of travel, for example, things like statutory sick pay, the expected changes next year to remove the waiting period and the thresholds. You can start to budget for the increased costs there, and you can start to do that now. Other areas that we're expecting in the Employment Rights Bill will need more detail on before changes can be made. And I suspect there will be a requirement to review employment contracts, to review employment particulars. But it's unwise to start to do that until you have the detail behind these changes. So I suspect it'll be a busy time for lawyers next year leading up to April to facilitate reviews of employment documents and help to update, amend, tinker with those documents and make sure that the processes behind them can facilitate those changes. So I think, yeah, understanding what the changes are in the short term is key. Preparing your budgeting for what we do know currently, and then taking advice where you need advice once we have the detail.
Great.
I
Anything to add, gents?
Yeah, I think one for me that's been on the agenda is the refinement of obviously worker and employee status, which is obviously under review at the minute. And if you think about in-house PAYE, as we've discussed, the majority of those who are on an agency's PAYE function would typically be engaged under a contract for service rather than contract of employment. So as James has alluded to, obviously you wait to hear further from them on this, but I think there's going to have to be a real view from, I'm thinking about the bigger agencies here with pools of a couple of hundred workers. Are you going to want to have to go through the process of re-engaging with these individuals on a contract of employment as opposed to a contract of service? That's going to be a decision that I suppose they have to make. So what one to obviously keep an eye on in my view, that one too.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right. Well, look, I think, guys, that's I think quite comprehensive, and as well, I think it's a lot to take in. And typically I work with agency owners, and we'll probably all start thinking about this in March next year anyway. But it's probably a good idea to at least start now warming people up to the ideas of what we need to do. The key themes and takeaways that I got out of this: if you're an agency right now, you should be doing a review of your list. You should be meeting your current suppliers or potential suppliers and doing due diligence. You should look out for things like accreditations, like real-time reporting. And you should also be using this as a really opportunity to ask your customers what they need to know, what could help, how you can potentially use this to push out other suppliers and get yourself in there. So, guys, thanks so much for taking the time out. If people want to get hold of you, how can they get hold of you?
Happy to put my details in the chat if that's the easiest way. I presume there's an attendance list, so yeah, happy for my details to be shared.
Yeah, same. LinkedIn, phone number, email addresses on there. Any support around upskilling staff, training from an R35 perspective, if you think that's going to be of value, please reach out.
Yeah, great. Same for me too.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for taking time out, guys. I think you've really, in layman's terms, made it clearer, and I've certainly learned a couple of things today, which is good. I think sometimes we live in this bubble and everything's very, very technical and scary, and I think you've done a very good job in making it feel very real and very practical. So thanks for your time, and catch up soon.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.